Have you ever stopped to think about what would happen if all the Blue Lock players were reborn with their memories from the original timeline? What would they do differently in the first selection? Would Isagi evolve faster? Would Rin still be that dominant? And would Japan finally make it to the U20 World Cup as a powerhouse right from the start? Listen up, guys. Let me tell you something. If players like Isagi, Rin, Barou, and Bachira went back in time with all their experience from the Neo-Egoist League, Blue Lock would change completely. At first, everyone would be confused. After all, they'd be back to being 15 years old with weaker bodies, but with the minds of heavily evolved players. And they would vow to become the undisputed best in the world, way faster. And that would be Isagi's first big problem. He'd still have his metavision knowledge, he'd know how to use the two-gun volley, and he'd understand his own ego way better. But his body? It just wouldn't be ready to keep up with all that. If he tried to spam metavision right out of the gate, his stamina would drain instantly. So even before entering Blue Lock, Isagi would do things differently. He'd spend the preceding years grinding, training his physique, stamina, and explosiveness. No waiting around for evolution to happen inside the project. This time, he'd show up way more prepared. When Ego Jinpachi finally sends out the letters and gathers the 300 strikers, the situation would be wildly different from the original timeline. Because Isagi wouldn't be the only one remembering everything. A bunch of players would also know exactly where they messed up, what their weak points were, and what they needed to improve. Even so, the first selection would still kick off with that infamous game of tag. Isagi walks into the room with Kira. In the original story, he hesitated, doubted himself, and almost let the chance slip. But this time, it would be different. As soon as the game starts, Isagi reads the space, understands the ball's movement, and uses his spatial awareness to eliminate Kira with a direct shot to the face in the first 3 seconds. Kira wouldn't even have time to process what just happened. And just like that, Isagi proves he's no longer that insecure player from the beginning of the story. After that, Team Z is formed. The structure of the first selection would be pretty similar, but the players' skill levels would be off the charts. Bachira, for example, he'd already have a crystal clear connection with his monster. He wouldn't play in a confused or purely instinctive way anymore. Now, he'd know exactly when to dribble, when to pass, and when to create plays on his own. Chigiri also wouldn't be held back by the fear of tearing his ACL again. Since he already knows he can sprint without destroying his knee, he'd unleash his top speed way earlier. That would make him a massive threat from game 1. And Barou? In the original timeline, Barou was the king of his stratum, but it took him a while to truly understand his own ego. Now, he'd come back with his Villain King style and his Predator Eye practically ready to go. In the first match against Team Z, Barou wouldn't even try to play normally. He'd go straight for the kill, using sharp cuts, aggressive movement, and quick finishes. But here's the catch. Isagi already knows how he thinks. So, using his play reading ability, Isagi would manage to shut down Barou's best shooting angles. This would make Barou furious, but at the same time, it would fast track his evolution. Instead of taking forever to accept his role as a villain, he'd reach that point right at the start of Blue Lock. But not everyone would thrive with memories from the future. The biggest example of this would be Nagi. In the original story, Nagi evolved a ton, but he also went through a serious slump after defeating Isagi once. He lost his drive, falling into a depression like he had reached his goal and had nowhere left to go. Now, being reborn with these memories, that issue would pop up way sooner. Nagi would remember how exhausting the Neo-Egoist League was, how hard he had to push himself, and how fragile his ego became after certain wins. Because of that, during the first selection, Nagi might just not feel like playing at all. While everyone else is grinding to evolve, he'd be stuck in that feeling of emptiness. And that would completely change Team V's fate. Without Nagi taking things seriously, Ryo would be forced to carry the team pretty much by himself. Originally, it took Ryo a long time to find his own path, but here, seeing Nagi give up, he'd be forced to mature much earlier. Fueled by frustration and desperation, Ryo would awaken his metavision and optimize his chameleon style. He'd copy plays, adapt to the field, and try to cover every single role on his own, but it still wouldn't be enough. Nagi would end up eliminated from Blue Lock. Yeah, you heard that right. In this timeline, Nagi Seishiro fails early on, and it would prove an important point. Talent is absolutely worthless if a player doesn't have the ego to keep evolving. On the flip side, Nagi's downfall would forge a much stronger, hyper-focused Ryo with a massive thirst for revenge. In the second selection, the matchups would get even crazier. Before Isagi and Rin clash, we'd get a super important rematch. Kunigami versus Shido Ryusei. In the original timeline, Shido broke Kunigami and sent him to the wild card. But guys, this time, things go down way differently. Kunigami had already trained his body beforehand to handle the stress of the wild card, effectively gaining his ambidextrous, almost cyborg-like stats without losing his hero spirit. So when they face off, the fight is way more balanced. When Shido tries his unpredictable shots with extreme spatial awareness, Kunigami easily matches his physical strength, blocks the shot midair, and fires off an insane 40-meter knuckleball with his right foot. perfect. Shido gets completely euphoric, screaming that he found his perfect rival. But in the end, Kunigami wins the physical battle. Kunigami survives the second selection without the trauma, proving that his path as a hero was always valid. Right after that, the inevitable showdown arrives. Isagi, Bachira, and a heavily evolved Ryo versus Rin's team. Except this time, Isagi isn't lagging behind Rin. He already has the physical conditioning, metavision, and a much deeper understanding of his own ego. The match would still be tough, because Rin also came back with his memories and his destroyer mode much closer to awakening. But this time, Isagi's physical stats are right where they need to be. We get a duel between Metavision Isagi and Destroyer Mode Rin way earlier, and it's absolutely insane. Instead of a one-sided beatdown, Isagi uses his egocentrism to predict Rin's berserk movements, scoring an impossible goal with a direct shot using his weak foot. Rin is stunned because he realizes Isagi leveled up way too fast. After that, they end up teaming up sooner, and with Isagi, Rin, and Bachira on the same squad, they literally sweep the rest of the selection in minutes. Very few players could even keep up with their pace. The third selection basically turns into a speedrun. Players like Karasu, Otoya, and Yukimiya realize they are leagues below the Isagi, Rin, and Bachira trio. Yukimiya, knowing his vision will eventually fail him sooner or later, decides to fully cooperate with Isagi instead of picking pointless fights. He maximizes his street dribbling to become the ultimate winger, making their offense literally flawless. Now, let's fast forward to the U20 match. This is where things completely flip. With the players already evolved and aware of the future, the grueling battle from the original turns into absolute dominance. The game against the Japan U20 team and Sei Itoshi wouldn't even be a real match. It would be a public humiliation. Right at kickoff, Barou steals the show. Using his Predator Eye, he completely bypasses Aiku and the Iron Wall defense, scoring from a ridiculous distance. But what happens when Sei calls up Shido to try and turn the tide? Shido is still dangerous, sure, but Blue Lock's defense is a literal fortress now. Nico, much closer to mastering his metavision, anticipates and cuts off the passing lanes before the ball even gets there. Kunigami knows exactly how to body him physically, and Gagamaru, fully aware of his potential and future career as a pro goalie, he pulls off insane acrobatic saves, blocking Shido's powerful dragon drive with terrifying confidence. Shido wouldn't be useless, but he'd be completely neutralized. Meanwhile, the main duel goes down, Isagi versus Sai. Sei Itoshi would still be the most technical player on the pitch, but in this timeline, Isagi isn't trailing behind. Using advanced metavision, he intercepts Sei's most complex passes, reading the play 3 steps ahead. That doesn't mean Isagi would easily humiliate the prodigy, but for the first time, Sai would be shocked to realize these kids aren't just promising high schoolers anymore. They're already thinking and playing with a world-class aura. The craziest and most decisive moment happens right at the end of the match. Sai, realizing his playmaking is getting read and countered by Isagi, attempts one last desperate play. But Rin, having fully embraced his destroyer ego from the very start, completely bulldozes his older brother at a crucial moment. Rin steals the ball, shatters Sai's defense, and instead of shooting, does the unthinkable. He passes to Isagi. Knowing that using Isagi as the final piece is the most logical and cruel way to completely destroy his brother's play and pride, Rin creates a perfect chemical reaction. Isagi receives the ball and scores the final goal with an explosive 2-gun volley. Blue Lock crushes the U20 national team brutally. Maybe it wouldn't be an unrealistic 10-0 blowout, but it would be a crushing, dominant victory that leaves zero doubts, completely shattering the U20 team's spirit. Sei would just sit on the grass, totally devastated by the level of those monsters. After this match, the whole world would start paying attention to Japan much earlier. Noel Noah, Chris Prince, and Mark Snuffy would watch the broadcast and realize something freaky happened there. Japan shouldn't have players of this caliber. Not this early, not like this. Ego Jinpachi just smiles because he knows exactly what happened. Blue Lock stopped being a project to create strikers. Now, it was breeding monsters capable of challenging the whole world, but this was just the beginning, because there's still an even bigger question. If Blue Lock reached this level so early, what would happen when they faced the real master strikers going all out? And what happens when Michael Kaiser arrives in Japan, only to realize that Isagi is already a bigger threat than him and totally immune to his mind games? That would be the next big phase of this timeline, a much more intense neo-egoist league, with Isagi, Rin, Barou, Bachira, Ryo, and Kunigami starting off way above the curve. He would become a real threat to global football. So, do you guys want to see part 2 of this story? Let me know in the comments how you think Blue Lock would do in the neo-egoist league with all these memories. If you liked the video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember, I'm Shoyo, and I'll catch you guys next time.